What's up, y'all? After about 18 months, I finally decided to create a video that I intended this channel to kind of be all about, which is the psychology of sports cards. I got carried away with ripping for a while, so we got away from that idea, but this is the first video in that series, and I hope you find it informative and helpful. But essentially today, I'm going to talk to you about the subjectivity in grading and the psychology behind that, all right? What biases are at play, how grading companies can mitigate, reduce that bias, and then ultimately why that's a good thing for the hobby and the alternative is much worse. Okay? All right, so before we get into it, a little bit about my background. My PhD is in industrial organizational psychology. Think about that as like the science behind HR. It's the study of people at work. We do anything from create, modify, hiring processes, performance management processes, training and development, leadership development, really anything under the sun when it comes to like people processes at organizations. And one of the coolest projects I worked on was revamping a performance management system for a Fortune 500 company. And part of that was identifying and reducing bias in the rating system, okay? And similar to how you would rate the performance of individuals, the biases that are in play there are also in play when you rate the quality of cards. There's going to be a subjectivity there, right? And you can never completely eliminate that bias as long as humans are involved in the process. And even if you're using AI, depending on what data was used to train those models, you might be interjecting biased data into your AI processes as well. So you can never truly eliminate all unconscious bias. You can only reduce it, all right, or mitigate it. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about the biases at play, the most common types, how that plays out in the grading process, and then what we'll do is we will talk about how grading companies can make that better and why it's not as bad as you probably think it is. Okay? Okay, so here are the most common types of biases in rating systems. Primacy, recency, severity, leniency, confirmation, and then the halo and horn effect. So what I'll talk about is each of these at a high level and then kind of show you how they play out. But primacy and recency, these are like point in time biases. So the first card that you grade in the day may influence your grading throughout the rest of the day. Recency, the most recent card that you graded, it could influence how you grade the other cards in your day. Severity and leniency, these are tied to the individual. So if you had if you went to school and you had a tough grader as a teacher or an easy grader as a teacher, this is kind of how that plays out, right? People just may be wired to be a little bit more harsh or easy when it comes to grading cards. And then confirmation and the halo and horn effect, those are really interesting as they pertain to cards because confirmation bias can play out in the opinions that you bring to the table. So what I mean by that is it's not only, confirmation bias isn't only I'm focusing on information that backs up my beliefs. Confirmation bias is also I'm actively ignoring information that goes against my beliefs, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. But halo and horn effect, these also could play out in a very personal way with the individual. Like if you're not a big fan of the Astros, for example, and you hate like Jose Altuve or Alex Bregman, when you get their cards in the to grade, you may judge them poorly. You may, because you don't like those players, the card suffers. Horn effect. Or halo effect, if you're a big like Aaron Judge fan, maybe the card appeals to you more and you're more likely to grade that card in a nice grade. So I've got 4 cards here, primacy and recency. So, let's say you have, they grade a ton of cards, but let's say we have 4 cards that we're grading for the day. The first card that I grade, if that card's like very off-centered, you can kind of see right here, then I might actually be less harsh to the next 3 cards because the first card I see, I'm subconsciously comparing the rest to that, and they all look better, so I'm going to maybe give that grade, a little bit of a bump. Recency, same kind of deal, except it's not the first card that you see, it's the most recent card that you see. Our brains kind of typically chunk information that way. We remember the things that happened to us more recently, and then we obviously, and then the first thing that we see usually influences our beliefs towards a certain object, person, that kind of thing. That's why first impressions are always so super important. And then the next one, severity and leniency, right? Like, you may have a grader who looks at this and says, this is 55-45 centering. It's not that bad. I'll probably let this go as a 10. But you may have somebody else where they say, I can tell with the naked eye that this is off-centered. It's never going to be a 10 for me, and it's going to be a 9. And then you get into the confirmation bias and the halo horn effect. I mean, I told you, confirmation bias, if I think Topps Update is an amazing set and I love it, I might overlook things like the centering on this card because I just like the set. And the same thing with the the other stuff is I may ignore, if I don't like Topps Update, I may ignore the good stuff, right? Like, oh, these cards are in great condition. I may try harder to find stuff that backs up my own beliefs, right? That's the thing about confirmation bias. You're more likely to search out information that backs up your ideas and ignore information that goes against them. And then the halo and horn effect is the same kind of idea, right? Very closely related to confirmation bias. They could even interplay with each other. As if you don't like Julio Rodriguez, you may be a little bit more harsh on his cards, right? As well as if you love the guy, you may be a little bit more lenient on his cards. So what can these grading companies do then to reduce the bias that when it comes to this kind of thing? I mean, to me, there's two kind of ways you get at mitigating bias in a grading process, and one of them is to attack the system, and the other is to attack the person grading, right? Or to go about it, attack them is a little harsh. But essentially what you do is you try and take out as much human involvement in the process as possible. And I didn't realize this, but PSA already does this. I just watched a video online where Alex Giamo, I'm probably butchering that name, apologies, but she toured the PSA facility with Nat Turner, and Nat was talking about technology that PSA uses in their grading process to identify centering. And that to me is a slam dunk right away, right? Is you're taking the human out of that instance and letting the computer decide whether or not the thing is centered. Now, depending on who was programming that software, you might get some bias in, right? He also mentioned that they have software that identifies the authenticity of the card, okay, or helps identify the authenticity. So I'm a big fan of AI-assisted processes, making it easier and more productive for the human to go through these systems. You always want a human with, kind of alongside the AI, in my opinion. But the software will look at, he said, millions of copies of a card to determine its authenticity. Now, depending on what data sets AI is trained on, the more subjective those data sets are, the more, subjective the AI is going to be. You're introducing bias into these training models. And there's a litany of examples in the professional world where AI has been used and it's been biased against a particular group of people, or it just gets things wrong, right? So depending on the training model that you use to build that AI, it could be a little off. But, getting people to be aware of bias, introducing technology that helps the grader make accurate decisions, those things are all going to reduce bias. And here's the deal. This is why it's good, okay? Regardless of whether or not you like grading, the reality is grading is here to stay, and it's much better than the alternative. Because you have an independent third party, that you have a system that is subjective, and PSA's own website says this, right? They have a whole paragraph on why grading is subjective, eye appeal, all that kind of stuff. I'll throw it up here while I'm talking so you can read it. But imagine if we didn't have that. You would have the opinions of every table at a card show, every buyer, every LCS, all bumping up against each other. My cards are all 10s, your cards are all 9s. It would be a mess. So we need this. I think, from my perspective, we need it. The issue is, don't treat these grades like the be-all, end-all voice of truth, right? We've seen countless examples of cards being cracked, resubmitted for higher grades, lower grades. There is subjectivity in this process, but it's better than the alternative. All right, that was a lot. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'm gonna see if y'all want this. I'll do more of these. But thanks for watching.